not successful. And it's very strange because, you know, you can read into language different things. You can read into the language of, you know, administered by the teachers as part of curriculum. These are called CABs, curriculum, all right, assessments. Curriculum embedded is a big word you'll hear a lot now. Well, you know, you can embed any piece of idiocy in a curriculum from the central office. It doesn't mean that it's actually going to be helpful to anybody in the actual teaching process. I was just at the Wisconsin State Reading Association conference on a panel on researchers. And one panel, you know, it was interesting to see some of the research that's going on because they were asking these questions about, so does this kind of stuff actually work? Does administering all these assessments actually work? And I had some side conversations. And the answer is, these people doing the research, it doesn't work. It doesn't even produce better outcomes, even by the stupid test scores over a long time. Never mind any other kind of outcomes. There's no evidence this stuff actually works done this way, and they're doing it anyway. Because they're freaked out and they're paranoid. They're fearful they're going to lose their jobs. They don't want the Milwaukee Sentinel, etc., trashing them in the press. On and on and on, and it creates a panic mode, and they don't believe that teachers will, in the end, develop to where, in a certain sense, they want them to be or need to be in a good sense. That is, they don't trust the teachers to end up being good professionals. So, not trusting the teachers, they're always looking a way around it. We used to talk, you know, hear the old stories about, you know, teacher-proof curriculum. Well, now we have teacher-proof teaching. And that's what's going on with this stuff, teacher-proof teaching. And so this is, in a certain sense, the major fallout from NCLB. And it's not the one we really anticipated. We knew it would have a heavy-handed impact on curriculum. I'd heard the stories even before from places like Texas where they test all the time. And so you hear this in qualitative research or in conversations about how, well, went into a classroom and, you know, asked the kids, they just, you know, read a short passage, and asked them to describe what they had just read, and they couldn't do it. What they could do was go back and look for key words so they could fill in the bubble. Or I gave them an extended passage and they stopped after 2 paragraphs. Why? They didn't think anything lasted more than 2 paragraphs. Reading ends at 2 paragraphs. And these kinds of stories you hear because of all the emphasis using the practice to the standardized test. Well, what we're seeing now is a more sophisticated version of that in which the computer becomes an incredible tool of control. And computers, you know, they could be used for lots of productive, positive kinds of uses. You could access all kinds of things. You keep your own data there more readily, on and on and on. But they can be very powerfully a control mechanism. And we're seeing a lot of that. And that's paraded under another major part that's followed in the wake of NCLB, which is so-called data, right? The information, everything is data, the term for the computer. And what you all knew about your kids is not data. What you all knew about your kids is, I don't know what it was, but it wasn't data. Data is, you know, that comes from probes and Teslas, and numbers, instant numbers, based on very trivial bits of stuff, typically, and then they add it all up. Except what they've all added up is not what is about a kid, it's not about teaching, it's not about learning. What we knew was going to happen was that it would in fact warp the curriculum. We knew it would dumb down the curriculum. We knew it would narrow the curriculum. We knew we'd see lots of teaching to the test. We knew that the curriculum would get narrowed. So what does the evidence show? Well, we were right. The evidence shows that the curriculum has been narrowed. That is, more time spent on math, more time spent on reading, less on history, science, art, recess, phys ed, lunch, you know, everything, less time. But more time on reading and math. The federal government's own studies have shown that's happened. And other studies have certainly shown it as well. It is also that there's more on teaching to the test. That is, in the subjects in which there's emphasis, because they're tested, a lot increasingly in too many places, the instruction resembles the test. And it does so both directly because of the test and because of all of these interim benchmarking, and I'll just call them fake formative, I guess. You know, they don't have a name now. Probes, I suppose, sorry, I'm too enamored of the word now. Let me see, was it District 9? It somehow reminds me of District 9. That wasn't used in it, but there's something about this. Anyway, it's an interesting movie, but that's a sideline. The Oscar nomination, I was surprised. Anyway, It's the narrowing and the teaching to the test that we knew was going to go on. And of course, this stuff, really clearly happens most often in places where test scores are low. It's going on in the burbs. When I talk to the people in the burbs around Boston, and we're talking some pretty wealthy places, of populations, very educated parents, and all the rest. And there's more and more emphasis on the MCAS, the Massachusetts state test. But don't touch what goes on in the cities. Because what was described here by Kelly, what we see in all of these, really minute day-to-day controls, that is not, as far as I know, going on in the suburbs. And my hunch is the parents would really go nuts, and they have enough power in those places that it would stop. But the more subtle moving of the curriculum toward what's on the test and the dropping of stuff that's not on the test is happening even in well-to-do areas. And it's dumbing down the curriculum there. There's language, the old saw, some of you may have heard, that you don't, if you want to fatten a pig, you don't weigh it, you feed it. And that one's been around, and you talk about sheep and cattle and elephants even, but the fact of the matter is that there's a kind of saw that's entirely correct. What we're doing now is an enormous amount of measurement in which the time is wasted because you're not teaching. But more than that, it destroys the possibilities of teaching. You see, it's not only that you're spending time weighing instead of feeding, you're kind of like substituting junk food for real food. And this is an unhealthy diet. So not only will the kids not gain weight, as it were, their educational weight, in a certain sense they're likely to lose educational weight, particularly the interest in learning. It's not like, look, I'm not going to kid you, I was not like some great fan of school when I was a kid. And in fact, arguably, I got into what I'm doing because I wasn't a fan of school in many ways, nor was my son. And lots of people I know. Some people really like school, and that's fine, but a lot of us did not. And we want to have something different for the kids. The kind of monotonous structures and the confinements did not appeal to me, and I didn't see any reason why kids should be raised that way or learn or be in schools that way, and it's clear they don't have to be. Nor is it a particularly natural way that people learn. Interestingly, there's a whole lot of research that's done by cognitive scientists who finally began to ask, behaviorists sort of said they treated the mind as a black box. They just looked at the inputs and the behaviors, right? So the cognitive scientists, what actually goes on there, and began to try to study this. And what they found out, interestingly enough, was in the general ballpark of some of the other kinds of researchers over many decades and decades who had actually tried to figure out what kids really do and think, and had asked them and so on. And Piaget and Vygotsky, not that they're the same because they're not, but it's that sense of finding out how human beings actually think. Well, they found out how students learn, how people learn. Got nothing to do with the structure of all of these tests. These tests reinforce modes of teaching and learning that are not compatible with the best ways and the ways naturally human beings learn. It's an active process, it's a doing process, it's a process of developing concepts and testing things out. It's not a process of memorizing lots of details and letting it be additive, which unfortunately is largely the approach in schools, totally reinforced and strengthened by the standardized tests. So what we end up with in the wake of No Child Left Behind is an enormous emphasis on testing all the time. The tests are what schooling is supposed to be about.